Yeah, so the
Jolly good.
yeah, no, I had a problem with our recording pipeline a couple of days ago where I realised it was failing because something had corrupted the Whisper model that I was using, so it was just shit in the bed every time. But it's now fixed and I've upgraded it, so I have like a local Whisper server that I can just hit whenever I want. But
I was looking at this the other day actually because I was thinking about pulling that from GitHub and just using it. Is it good?
I can send you a node script that'll just set everything up for you.
Okay. Oh, that sounds
that's the easiest way to do it,
Yeah.
I think. But I was, it's good. So I guess for anybody I was going to say nobody would be interested in this stuff, but we literally talk about AI, and this is using AI in an automated fashion for something. So I
maybe
guess people would be interested if you bother
most
listening to
interesting
this.
thing.
You might be interested in it, but yeah. So the purpose of the podcast was to keep it super simple. And one of the things we realized after the first episode is like, oh, hang on a minute. Like, even if you've got a file with the audio, then you need to, our audio was terrible, right? It was way too quiet. So we wanted to boost the audio, but that's quick and easy fix, but you've got to do it. And then we realized that with the particular mics that we use, you get like a weird effect where you'll get a lot of left or a lot of right, depending on who's talking. So we wanted to stabilize all that. So there's more production there. And then you go to upload the file and you go, oh crap, I can't publish anything because I don't have any show notes. So I can even push it without and then come back to it. So all of a sudden there's a bunch of tasks that you need to do. So for a few weeks now, we've had all of that just nice and streamlined and ready to go. So we record the episode, it drops in a folder, we run a script, and then everything is taken care of. So it takes the file, it ups the volume, it produces from the video an MP3 file to go along with it. It stabilizes the left-right channel output so that everything sounds quite nicely. Hopefully you'll have noticed that the audio is much better in the last couple of ones. Yep. But it'll also then take that MP3 file and produce a transcript of what we've said. So we get like a transcript with timestamps and a transcript without timestamps, and we use those for different purposes later on. So for the show notes, we take the timestamp transcript and we produce like all the different sections of the podcast are all done. Like we also produce like a hit list of like, okay, these are areas that might make good clips. Like we're not really doing too much with that information at the moment, but we get it out. It'll then start to write sort of articles for us that summarize what we talked about, and we're probably going to just expand this with more things around, like what are all the different subjects that we covered, and then what are the good hooks that would go along with those, and then how would we talk about that on, say, social media or somewhere else. So it gives us a good prompt sheet of things to post about this going forward. So yeah, like very much looking at just automating that whole marketing pipeline, because like I don't think either of us like doing marketing. So.
It's also, as anyone who has created content will know, this is just really time consuming. There's a bunch of steps, a bunch of different outputs that you're trying to generate. Each one takes a lot of time. Like if you're trying to go through, I did this manually really early on. The first couple of episodes, you go through the episode, you try and extract bits that make good clips for YouTube Reels or TikToks and things like that. And that is just me re-listening to stuff going, would this work? Is this worth putting out on the internet in short form? And, there's a bunch of, manual process that just gets baked into this, which is really time consuming. And so I guess the objective here was, how much of this stuff could we just bake into a process that basically gets kicked off when we take the video audio file that we generate from the podcast recording, and then we run the script, and it basically produces all of these outputs for us. And I guess the ideal state we'd like to get to here as well is, sometimes we just bollock on the podcast, and certainly I'm guilty of this, not explaining something as clearly or as articulately as I possibly could. Maybe there's a good example that comes to me later. Often I'm driving home after this and I'm like, oh, that would have been a really good analogy to use then. And so we might look at something like 11 Labs and building voice clones, where we can then essentially take that transcript from the episode, identify what would make, really good short form clips, re-script some of that stuff so it's like essentially repurposed for a YouTube reel that's 30 seconds or it's a minute or something like that. But it's essentially purpose built. And then that script gets fed into our 11 Labs voice clone so that we actually don't need to sit and re-record a bunch of stuff. And yeah, I think that just gives us the ability to go and produce like shitloads of content. Like, I think that's the, we're not necessarily just going to spam all of it, but I think it gives us the ability to just produce content at scale without us necessarily wasting.
The question is it spam
hours.
if it's on LinkedIn? What's the bit that's not spam?
All right, it's all spam. I take it back immediately.
Oh dear.
But I think if you think about it, like, there's just a huge amount of leverage here, right? It's like the ability to go and generate huge amounts of content from source material that would otherwise take, I don't know, hours and hours and hours of manual process.
Well, I think there's this turning out this could be a good thread. So let's intro. Welcome to the good stuff.
We're episode 7.
Episode 7.
We're over the hurdle.
We don't know what we're going to call this one yet, so we'll hopefully at some point in this discussion, the title will naturally emerge.
Like last week.
Yeah. I think this is more broadly applicable as well, right? Because we looked at this before for like knowledge capture systems, or how do you, for knowledge management in an organization, you've got a whole bunch of ideas, there's a whole bunch of discussions that are constantly going on. Like, how do you then share those like across the organization? How do people keep up? If you're not in a meeting, have you missed what's going on? Like, can we take transcripts of meetings, pull out particular like entities and facts and interesting moments, and then turn those into clips or podcasts or whatever that can be shared?
Yeah.
Like, this is all quite doable with this, and like interesting ways to improve that communication layer inside the business, which I think is quite, particularly then you match it with your graph databases and whatnot.
Exactly.
Like a bit of like solid entity extraction to figure out what is actually being discussed here and what's the other relevant information that we know about this.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about like what an organization is, right, it's essentially just a collection of knowledge that exists. And one of the challenges that you get inside, especially larger organizations, mid-sized companies, is that there's often skill and knowledge that is wrapped up in key people, right? And then those key people leave the business, and you somehow have to go and bridge whatever that knowledge gap is, and then maybe you bring someone else in whose knowledge might be roughly similar, but maybe there's like a few bits around the edge that's missing from like a lack of experience within the company, and then things just are done a little bit differently. But you could capture all of that knowledge, that information, and then, as you say, you store it in this like dynamic memory via a knowledge graph. And then the organization is just this like living, breathing, dynamic entity that is constantly compounding the collective knowledge of all of the people within it. Yeah,
and you could give that, you can almost give that a name and a persona, and like you can talk to it and
that's it.
Ask questions, and it can like give you, I don't know, like company recaps on a weekly basis. You just get your podcast on the way to work of what went on. I don't know. I'm sure we'll build out all this.
It depends on the form factor that people most want. I think that's the best thing, right? Is like not everyone's going to want to listen to it. Some people might want to read just a quick, palm card summary of what's been happening in the organization. Others might want, persona driven podcast, and other people might just want to just send me a bunch of tweets from people in the organization. Like, it just depends on the form factors. Like, how do you want to consume?
I like the idea that like if you did have records of all of these things and somebody left the organization, instead of like having to give them a ring up afterwards and take them out for coffee to figure something out, you say, all right, well, I'll just talk to your like virtual avatar.
That's
like it's a bit creepy. Like, as long as you don't give it the same name and face and stuff, but it's like if there's company knowledge there that you need to discuss with, you can just discuss with the AI as opposed to that. That sounds like a good use case. So I'm not going to rush to build it right now unless somebody
desperately wants
asks us for it.
Yeah,
but, it's
as in you've got.
I can see how you could do that.
Your own digital twin that lives within.
Well, we had that notion at Stackwork, right? As we discussed, it was you'd have different sort of graphs of knowledge at different levels. Yes. So there's your personal graph, which is just yours and should live entirely on infrastructure that you own.
Yep.
And that would be all of your personal things and your core knowledge, right? But then there's the stuff that you're discussing amongst a team or a project or something like that. That's actually shared knowledge across that project. It's just that for the most part, we don't write stuff down. But if you take all of the, the instant messages and the emails and the phone calls and whatnot, you can start to build like a graph of like what the knowledge base is inside that team or that project, and that could persist beyond you. And then you would have like the team level and then the public level potentially above that, where the public one is just the accumulated knowledge we can scrape from the internet about a subject. And then you can pull that into, you know, different agents and frameworks to ask questions of that. And it's all, I mean, we talked about it as in the Hive process I was working on. One of the concepts was around having like, you know, the equivalent of Jamie from Joe Rogan, but he's an architect now.
Yeah.
All right, and you could give him a ring and say, or have him join a call between, you know, so this would have been, say, like between myself and Paul, and we would talk about the architecture of a new system component, and he would just listen in on the call and do live transcriptions and lookups against the graph to then present us information in the call that was relevant to what we were discussing. So you're talking about this part of the system, here's the system diagram for this part of the system. Like you're saying that you want to make this change, here's the flow on impacts of this change. Like here's a problem that you're going to have if you go down this route. Here's a risk that you're not identifying. And so, and just have something that you can provide that's like really rich contextual information, like live real time. I didn't get it working real time. I had like a post discussion version where you could take the call, run the transcript, do the entity extraction, and then get back like an analysis of the conversation that you just had about a feature. So you could write feature briefs, you could do risk analysis, you could do like architecture reviews on things that you talk about in the call. But I think it would just get a lot more natural if you had that running real time, like with somebody interacting with you in the call. Like that would be the key end goal.
Big benefit there is you've got this like huge reservoir of contextual memory that is enabling these agents to just continue to essentially self-improve over time as well, and keep adding to that contextual memory as well with every interaction that you have with it and others within the organization have with it. And that becomes really powerful.
I don't know if you saw this morning, I shared this on Sphinx, but it was Pablo of writes all the stuff in Nostr fame. As he's released his 10x agent framework that he's been working on after sovereign engineering. I swear I'm gonna have to go to the sovereign engineering next year if I can get away with it. It looks so much fun.
Just walk us through it.
But so what he's done is he's got a set of agents that will run away and like, so he will give like an agent a task, or he sets a, this is what I can infer from the thread anyway. So you give a task, and it will then be done by one or more agents on Nostr. So the task becomes like an event on Nostr, and then you get like a thread of replies where, like, let's say 4 or 5 agents will come along and try and solve that problem, and then he can choose which one he likes as the solution to it, but also give feedback to it, and then go down that thread. And you could potentially do that with 2 or more different threads, and then decide like, okay, that one's not working anymore, this one is working. And what you've got is this map of like, from your problem, all the different attempts to solve that problem, the different paths that you've gone down, and all the human replies that he's made that teaches the thing how to get better. And I was like, oh shit, that's like, that is going to be such an amazing database to then use to start improving these things going forwards, because you're now baking in the use of the agent plus the human feedback that's supervising it to make it better. And then you use that for like reinforcement learning, or potentially producing like a graph neural net about like, how would we solve these particular problem type. And everything is available on Nostr. Everything is like linkable and addressable. Like everything, we know exactly like which agent did what. We know what all the system prompts are for all the different agents. And it's like, this is a hell of a data set.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because like, I'm not sure if you'd agree with this, but like often one of the criticisms that gets thrown around about language models is that they're potentially not that good at helping solve novel problems, right? And I suspect some of that is like a memory problem, right? It's just not enough contextual memory potentially. But that seems like a really interesting solution to that.
Yeah, like I think it's going to give you much better models.
Yeah.
Very quickly. I mean, on the solving of problems thing, it doesn't. This feels to me like one of those same situations that we come across quite a lot, where people say, it can't do this, and like what they've done is just said, do this.
Yeah.
and then because it doesn't instantly spit out like the exact answer, it's just written off. And you would go like, but like if you got like, let's say you had this particularly like hard bug that you needed to solve, or you were re-architecting this system component, or you needed to do something that was quite unique, would you get like even the best person in the world, you come in and go, how do you solve this now?
Yeah.
No paper, nothing.
Yeah.
Just solve it. Like,
Yeah.
no process. You've just got to tell me the answer. And it would just be so unnatural.
Yeah.
Like, why would we expect this to work? Whereas, like, what you would do is you would go, I don't know. And you would spend like a long time trying to break down that problem into component parts and different strategies. You might have like 5 or 6 different like threads that you would take. You would start to, like proof of concept out a few different parts of those threads, and then you throw that away because it didn't work, or it did work, but it wouldn't work in the context that you bring it back to.
Yeah.
And then eventually you would come up with something, and it might take you like, I don't know, months to solve these things. Like, and that would seem perfectly reasonable for a human, but the constraint that we would apply to the LLM before we'd write it off as being unable to do this is, can't even do this in 40 seconds.
Yeah.
It's like, or half an hour, like with no free sort of thing.
The process that requires trial and error and experimentation
there's
is inherently part of that process that you can't skip.
So we had that conversation with Gav recently, right? Shout out Gav.
Yes.
Friend of the pod.
Friend of the pod.
If you're listening to this, Gav, give us a boost. Listen
Yeah.
on Fountain. You can send us sats.
Oh, there you go.
Oh yeah, I set that up the other
Nice.
day. Like, nobody's sent us sats yet.
Well, there's still time.
One day, if you're listening and you haven't sent us sats on Fountain, like, there's your
Call to action,
call
right?
to action.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was I about to say? Yeah. So yeah, he talked about it in terms of creativity, right? So the guy, he's a very creative guy. I love his like stuff that he posts on LinkedIn. He's like one of the few people that's kind of unique in that space. And he's right. Like he said, like, creativity can be taught.
Yeah.
It's a skill that you can learn, and it comes down to a process that you go through. And if you push yourself through that process, then you'll end up being more creative. And like any like author that I've listened to about writing and the processes, it always seems to come down to you just got to turn up and sit in front of a page and then sit there until there's like 1,000 words on the page. And if you get really carried away, keep going. But as a minimum, you just need to turn up every day and put pen to paper, and it turns out you'll get way better at writing if you just keep doing that.
Yeah.
And you're like, I think there is a process to solving problems.
Yes.
It's very abstract, and we just give a lot of freedom and space to people that do it. And it's not clear how we would codify that into AI systems yet, but there's nothing unique that would stop us coding that into AI systems. And then the difference is that where we might need to give, 3 months and, 100 grand to somebody to solve this problem previously, now it becomes all right, it's a week's worth of computes that costs 2 grand. And to run it, like, if you were going to run a 2 grand compute job, you'd be like, God, this feels like a lot, because it's just such a different like level of spend than you're used to for just running. I've got a $20 subscription. Like, why do I need to pay more than that? But then I don't know. I had a similar.
The equivalent is how many people do you have sat in the office that are thinking about this problem, and how long do they spend thinking about it?
Well, and we're quite forgiving to the human component of this, right? Whereas we would spend like 100 grand on that, and then go, oh, it didn't work. Oh well, we got the best guys in, and they could. So at a minimum, you should, if you're going to do the 100 grand one, also do the 2 grand version and just leave a machine thinking for time in.
Yeah, it's the classic meme. Why not both?
Yeah. So I mean, that's one component of it. I know I had a similar. Like, I was reluctant to go and buy like the OpenAI Pro model, and I did it in the end because I wanted to generate some videos for my daughter, and I barely used it for that because it's actually a bit crap. It turns out.
Yeah.
But it was it really is a good researcher. Like, if I've got like just something that I want to know, or I'm designing a new feature or something where it's not clear to me exactly what the answer is. I know that all the information is out there on the internet, and I know that if I spent like a week dealing with this, like I could probably come up with a good view of it. Or before I drive somewhere, I can just give the instructions to O3 Deep Research. It asks me back 5 questions to clarify. I say, here's all the answers to that. And then I just let it go. And it can come up with novel strategies for how to solve stuff that I need. And then I take that and then I use that as a plan to move forward. So
Yeah,
it works.
I think the framing and the
remarkably
context
well.
is really important there, though. There's maybe a meta level skill for the human here is how to think. And I think actually what you've described, you've just made a case for why I think generalists will win. And there's maybe some framing here.
Cool. I feel like I'm a generalist, so this is good news.
Yeah, me too. And so maybe I'm speaking my own book here a little bit, but I think that's what I'm hearing in what you're describing there, right? But what I will say is, like you mentioned earlier this framing of, oh, ChatGPT doesn't do my job, therefore this isn't going to be the right tool for what we need. And it's funny, you know, I was thinking about this recently and I was having this conversation with a friend of mine last weekend. There's almost this like I'd say near unanimity in the types of responses people will give to this question of, will AI take your job? Like when you ask someone point blank, will it take your job? Like what you think your job is, will it take it? Like I would say almost always, especially outside of a tech circle, people will say no. And they're definitive about it. I'm yet to really have a conversation with someone outside of tech that has gone, do you know what? Yeah, I believe AI will definitely take my job. Yeah. And I think what's interesting is they will often justify it by citing some like unique kernel of knowledge that they've built up through compound effort over time, or there's some like unique aspect to their job, or that they've just tried ChatGPT and they said, do my job, and it didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting there is they've honed in on like a unique subcomponent of their job to justify why the totality of the job won't be taken by AI, without realizing that actually what you need to do is decompose that job into its subatomic form. And then that highlights a bunch of individualized, like, you know, individual tasks that then an agent can do in perpetuity. And I think that again, this is where I think the framing like really matters, is like once you decompose those tasks into its subatomic form, you can then assess to what degree like an agent, or I'd just say AI, can actually perform that one subatomic task. Then you can assess what is the like error rate of that agent or that AI versus what like the relative human error rate is, right? Because there's always a human error rate. We just kind of
we just brush it off,
right? And then I think the assessment of those two rates of error gives you like an acceptable rate of error, right? It's like, what's the AI rate of error relative to the human rate of error, and let's try and like find an acceptable point in the middle.
One of the things that we do for human error is we would introduce a manager and say, like, check the work.
Yeah.
We can introduce AI managers.
There are checks and
as
balances.
well. Like, there's ways to check stuff.
And then it's like the question is like, okay, well, what's the upside then of now being able to do this subatomic task repeatedly, in perpetuity at the kind of speed and velocity that can't be matched by a human? Because now we've just taken a part of your job and we just put it on autopilot, and it's being done even when you're not in the office, even when you're not at work.
So I think this is where the intelligent assembly line is the goal, right? Because it's, if you think about it from like a bionic human point of view, it's not that useful. I mean, it is useful if there's a particular point of my job, like in my 8-hour day, there was a point that used to take an hour and now it takes 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's great, but it's not an absolute game changer because nothing else has really changed, because the whole job is built around that container of a person that you required to get the stuff done. So I think when you start to speed up all those individual components, what you start to realize is, oh, I can like massively accelerate all these things, but I get no benefit from this,
Right?
Because I still have to just put them all into a human. So like, so basically what you've done is turned like somebody that used to do intelligent work for you into a machine that drinks coffee and watches work get done. And if you're at that point, you'd have to say like, okay, well, I need to re-architect this a little bit, because there's no point in like the person just waiting around, or the machine waiting around for the person to be there to do the work. We need to rethink the process from a machine first point of view, and then what are the edge cases that we burst out to humans where we need them, and how do we deal with that?
But I think there's an assumption here that's wrapped into this, right? It's like, if AI, this question of like, will AI take my job is just essentially a binary, right? It's either like 100% it will or it can't. And I just think that is like too simplistic a framing here, but that's how we all think about it. And so there's almost this, like we've talked about the kind of language labor load heuristics for the organization, at a kind of meta level, that assesses the degree of applicability for AI within the processes in that business. But I think you can apply a similar set of heuristics to a job function. And then that gives you, this question of like, okay, at what percent of the tasks that Joe does in his job function does it equate to that job being done in its totality by AI? And by that I just mean like, okay, maybe the answer isn't 100% of your job means you lose your job to AI. Maybe it's just 20 to 30% of the tasks you used to do are now automated away. And so this has a bunch of like second order effects inside the organization, because now all of a sudden you go, well, hang on, like we've got a bunch of people who do the same job. Maybe some of these roles can now be like combined or consolidated. So that means just fewer people within that company are required, because one person can do what 3 people were doing previously. And then of course you get the second, the third order effects are kind of a more macro level, is like, okay, what happens if now you've got a bunch of excess supply for a job function in a market? Well, that over time should probably drive down the value of that work, the price that a company is prepared to pay for it, because there's an abundance of people who can do the work. And so like, even if you just essentially give people the tools, you still like end up with like this value trap effect in the long term, because you're going to drive down the price that companies are prepared to pay for that labor, because there's just an abundance of it. So then I guess like to wrap this, it's like the question is like, if 30% of your tasks within your job function are taken by AI, does it mean that AI has taken your job?
I mean, it's certainly taken 30% of it, right?
Yeah. The question is like, when you factor all of the second and third order effects of losing 30% of that job function, like what happens? How does that, like, it's the game theory of how that plays out, I think.
I mean, if we just take the magic words AI, or letters, AI out of this, and we just sort of said like, all right, well, is there any other historical context that we could look at around just technology? And like, this has been the relentless, pursuit of technology for the whole time, like just this constant taking of work away from people. Saying like, we've always used software and hardware and other technology really just to speed up the amount of work that we had. So like, let's say in the production of a car, at some point you would have said like, all right, well, the car can only put the body panels on, like this robot can only do the body panels, and this robot can only tighten screws, and this robot can only do this. And then what you saw is that, like, one of those robots couldn't take your job. Like, it turns out a few hundred of them in a line can take your job, because we can then mechanize the assembly line. Like, so again, I think the intelligent assembly line comes out there, and like, that's how it starts to, like, that's how you end up pushing into that space where it does take jobs. But even when you first had that, like, you would have had like a bunch of robots that just did parts of the work, and then it went to humans, and what it meant was just the whole system required less input. And it's not that like people just hang around and don't do anything. Like, the person just moves on to the next most valuable task that you can do, which is great. That's what you want people to do. I mean, the bit that will be interesting is like, all right, I wonder, as we start automating out a lot of these intellectual tasks, assuming this works, I think we still end up with like there's a set of tasks that are just so unique that humans just happen to be the best for a while. Like, I don't see why it's protected long term. Like, it's odd to me to think that like you can't replicate the process for problem solving, creativity, uniqueness just by massive amounts of brute force and randomness. Like, evolution's done a pretty fucking good job of giving us exactly all the right natural things that we need to exist in this environment. And like, we seem to get a bunch of problems coming up when we don't respect like a lot of those things that evolution gave us. So I think you could just run that on just on a computer timescale and move way more quickly through that process for any sort of problem solving and finding a fit.
I think in the same way though, like if you look at like email coming along, didn't necessarily kill off the secretary, but it did essentially remove the need for these typing pools and mail distribution centers, and like so if you're working in those kinds of roles that more like administrative typing based.
I never got my pneumatic tube.
But there you go. You know, and I think this is like an interesting like point about this. It's because like this shift that is occurring, because it occurs at a subatomic level, it is easier to miss because there's like more of a kind of gradual displacement that's occurring. And so today it's 2 of my tasks that get like essentially automated away, and the next month maybe it's another 1 or 2, and the next year maybe it's all of a sudden it's like 50% of my tasks. Yeah. And I think it's like slowly slowly until it's not, and then it's like all at once. And maybe that's part of the challenge for a lot of people not seeing the kind of the displacement.
I think that's why there's a blind spot for this, is that like you view your job as a whole. Your job isn't a whole, it's 200 different jobs, and any one of them is automatable. There's a question around whether it's worthwhile to go through that. So some jobs are going to get done quicker than others. Like, you know, the amount of money that gets paid to software engineers globally is huge. Yeah. Plus software engineers are really into software, and they're quite happy to automate away their jobs. They've been doing it for years. It's kind of the way they operate. So it's not really a surprise that there's so much effort going into automating coding right now.
Yeah, completely.
It aligns quite nicely, but I almost think if you can solve that problem, everything else is probably going to seem a little bit simple. And then it's just a case of writing all the tooling to get it done. But it makes you wonder, like, what remains at the end of this, right? Like,
well, this is the link to generalism, I think, to some degree, right? I think the skills required shift. So we mentioned like there's this meta skill around how to think. You know, I think there's like maybe this like differential between like fixed mindset and growth mindset becomes like economically determinative. And I guess like what I mean there is you hit an inflection point where like those skills matter more. You know, it's like how adaptable are you? How open-minded are you? You know, how open to learning?
But I could make a really adaptable, open-minded AI agent. Like, I wonder, like, why would that be?
Well, but it's about what problems you want to go and solve, right? So it's like, okay, so think it like generalists, I think, work really well when you like operate in these like kind of environments that have, you know, essentially few or no rules, right? They're pretty fluxy. I think
maybe like here's another one, right? So for entrepreneurs, risk tolerance is a huge thing. It's like does an AI have risk tolerance or not, and how does it judge that? Or like, I mean, people talk about taste. I feel like taste I could probably brute force by A/B testing a whole bunch of stuff. So I don't know if that's that defensible. Like, I think what to build and just having some sort of intent in the world is like intent and like risk tolerance and like owning of capital. Like they feel like they're going to be harder to dislodge just because humans have got all the money right now. So at some point, even if AIs have money to spend on stuff, my assumption here is that it will be the humans have money and they give them to the AIs to accomplish jobs, because the AI has no desire or intent of its own. It needs to get it from somewhere. Now, does that go out the window if somebody just says like, all right, go and build me take over the world and turn everyone into paperclips? I don't know. I don't know if that's useful exercises.
I think that's like the right framing. I guess the point I was trying to make about generalism is that like we're in this environment now where it becomes less about like knowing the exact answer to any particular question, and instead it's more about knowing like which questions to ask. And so that's where I think, you know, the adaptability and the open-mindedness, the, you know, willingness to learn, like how perceptive are you to all of these changes that are occurring around you? These are the things that like enable agency. Yeah. And then you can use the technology that's around you in meaningful ways. I think this is why we've talked about, you know, I mean, I'm framing this as like, you know, generalism more broadly, but I think this also underpins why we think this is like a golden age for entrepreneurs as well, to some degree.
I do wonder if we're maybe also thinking on different timescales like it's not obvious to me that there's any of that still exists in 20 to 50 years, for instance. But if you said like what are the skills you really want in the next 5, I would say absolutely, like you want to be very general, very adaptable, like because the things that this can do will keep changing.
Yeah.
And then you will need to keep moving to the things that it is not doing. And it's not to say that it won't get to those things, but there's definitely going to be like a diffusion of tool build out here, where we'll start in one space and then we'll move to the others. So I think long term, like a lot of the sort of work is done, like of any intelligent work is done by these machines in some way or another. And then, you know, like at some point, I guess we'll fall back to being the manual work, but even that, like, we already know that we can outsource a lot of that. That's what car manufacturing plants and various things have told us. Like, you know, do we even need like a general like humanoid robot, or could you just have like a floating spanner that does all the floating spanner tasks, and a floating screwdriver that just flies around and screws in screws? Like, it doesn't need to be so general purpose that it can be put everywhere. But yeah, I think really the focus, like if you were planning for this, would be on, I need to be adaptable, I need to understand the constraints of what this thing can do and can't do, and then I need to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, they're transition period skills, right?
I think so.
I think the caveat here that I would certainly apply is like, it's probably not even worth trying to think beyond 5 years, because we just can't see
you're
it.
basically in the world of magic at this point, right? It's like, well, how good do these things go? Like, there's not an obvious stopper for me on this. I don't think, like, the things that get thrown up around, like, oh, it can't be creative. It's like, I think that's nonsense.
Yep.
Like, I think that really comes down to observing what's going on in reality, derivative works, randomness, and then trying shit, seeing what works.
Yeah, I think
like there's a process around.
Some of that also comes out of people's experience using a language model like ChatGPT. It's like a very broad-based, general, probabilistic tool.
Yeah.
You know, so it's probably not the thing that's going to give you
and the bias to
you're
like
looking for.
Now. It's like, do it now, as opposed to like, I think if you sit with ChatGPT and you spend days like prompting it, listening to what it says, starting a new chat, reprompting it, going down a different alley, like pulling up on that one, starting again, doing a new chat, running a deep research, coming back again. Like, you can do all these things. Like, it can be creative if you push it through the process. And then once you recognize that you can push it through the process manually, well, there's no reason why you couldn't push it through the process automatically much quicker. At which point,
how do you think about,
maybe we should build a problem-solving workflow that just costs like $1,000 a pop. People can just run it, see what they get.
It'd be interesting, wouldn't it? I mean, it depends on like the. I think again, the type of questions that you're asking. That's like a high-value skill to just have, knowing what to ask in a really uncertain environment. And, you know, again, that's contextual, right? Because generalists they have a little bit of knowledge from a bunch of different disciplines. And so that gives you this kind of varied contextual understanding of how things are done in different ways in different places. And you can apply that to a particular problem that's staring you in the face right now. Whereas, I think that's one of the challenges with specialists. It's very domain heavy, it's compounded knowledge over a long period of time, and so you know exactly how to solve a particular problem as it's presented to you.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the distinction. It's like, as you drive down the price of intelligence, then, you know, that intelligent form now knows the answer to that question as well. But it's vastly cheaper to access.
Well, there's another like massive benefit here to add it, like taking that domain of expertise and knowledge and moving it from a human's head into a computer, which is that computers are very good at networking in a way that we're not. You know, like once you've established this in one place somewhere, it's only down to the intent of the person controlling that computer program whether everybody else in the world has access to that information or not. So you could solve a problem once somewhere in the world. I would say that I'm sure if we were able to like somehow, you know, we were the Placer's demon or whatever, and we're able to like just look at the world and just understand in the moment, like how many people in the world right now are attempting to solve problems that have already been solved because they're just unknown to them.
Yes.
And I would be surprised if it's not somewhere in the high 90s.
Yeah.
Of like all the
That's right.
If just imagine like if you could just solve the problem once, it becomes somehow addressable and discoverable on the internet. And then now anybody else that wants to do the problem, they already have the solution to that problem. It's already been codified and put in. They know they can run it again and get the same answer. Like, fuck, that's like that doesn't exist in nature with us, right? Like the best we've got is that you solve it and then you'd have to spend all your time talking about it to then have a discovery problem of how does the person even discover you to listen to you in the moment. Like it's so inefficient the way that that problem solving like capacity just spreads. That's gonna be fucking huge.
Yeah, it's like, how do you build the pyramids in different parts of the world at roughly the same time? It's because that intelligence is networked somehow, right?
Is this you wanting to get back to
Conspiracy corner?
Conspiracy corner.
Always.
I mean, mushrooms.
Always. We should have like a separate pod for conspiracies. No, but like that's, you know, I'm being a little bit facetious, but it's like, yeah, that's essentially it, right? It's how do we basically tap into combined human knowledge or collective intelligence that's contextualized from someone trying to solve a problem anywhere in the world, because presumably someone somewhere else is going to have the same problem or some sort of similar problem.
Yeah.
And you're right, that like a lot of business is just building the nth version of stuff that already exists because there's a large enough market to go and like potentially compete away some return that exists in that market.
So is there like a skill here to just like, guys, crows in Australia are so Australian. Like they're just the way they talk. Like crows in the UK never made this noise.
Yeah.
This like nah mate, nah. It's just like they're so Australian. They're so Aussie.
Very good impression.
Nah, just down the beach, mate. Nah. I want to get on that podcast. I'm just gonna shout next to their van. Where were we? Oh God,
that's an amazing impression.
I have no idea what I was saying.
That is incredible. I love it.
But okay, so maybe there's a skill there around, that was it, uniqueness. Like there's, again, I don't know if this is like defensible, like super long term, but just this figuring out like what's, all right, well, assuming we can like solve a problem once and it's available for everybody, that's just going to become an addressability and discoverability problem, which computers are better at that, frankly. Like how do you figure out like what the next best thing to do is?
Well, that's it. That's the method. It's like, what is the problem worth solving here? You know, it's like it's
maybe
like
it's like our thing will be to be in pain so that we can go, could you resolve this pain for me?
Yeah.
And it'll go, yeah, cool, done. Right, and you go, cool, that's good. Now I have this problem.
Yeah.
It's this like weird like Epicurean thing of just experiencing really nice things and then going, it's not perfect.
So this is to some degree how we approach product as well.
Yeah.
For other stuff, it's like, what we're just scratching our own itches most of the time. It's like, what is this problem that I have that I want to solve?
Yeah.
It's like, we're not trying to go and figure out, like, build a focus group around like which market should we build this product for, like what's the minimum viable version of this. Like we're just building it to a point where it solves the problem that we have.
Yeah.
And whether or not that market exists is purely dependent on how many other people have the same pain point as us who would like that pain point resolved. Like that's really as simple as it need be.
Yeah. Well, and then it's worthwhile because you've resolved your own pain
exactly
point, right? Like it's just...
But that's also part of technology enabling progress, because in the past, to solve that problem might have taken like a team of people, $1 million of capital, and like a year's worth of time to go and like code up, that product. But now we've just got this ability to go and spin this stuff up really quickly.
You just do it on the side.
Yeah.
Like whilst doing other stuff.
While doing the other stuff.
It's like, well, this agent's running to build that program, so I may as well flip into the other one and start designing my game rules.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
But I must admit, I kind of don't necessarily enjoy like pontificating on like the kind of more doomerous stuff. But like you hear this counterpoint that's made a lot, that every new technological era like kills jobs, but it creates a whole raft of new ones that we haven't foreseen yet. And I guess like my question here is this time different?
Well, I've had that. I remember a couple of years ago at like a Bush Bash having this discussion with old Bill, and I was like, I'm very much in like the pro technology, like people will just find something else to do generally, but it does feel like we're taking like whole sections of jobs. Like we did this with when we talk about blue collar jobs. We took a lot of manual labor jobs, and they don't exist anymore. And we say, oh yeah, but people found other stuff to do, and they did intellectual jobs. And you go, yeah, okay, but now we're taking now attacking the whole category of intellectual jobs. So where do they where's the obvious bit that they go to? Like it's really hard to think through what's the end game there. I mean,
I think that's the important distinction here, is that like in the past, if you look at these like technological shifts, like we talked about in a couple of previous episodes, the agricultural revolution as well, the mechanization of farming led to more industrialization, so people were able to gravitate toward the cities, pick up those jobs as like a new technology was emerging that kind of killed off the last major bit of technology that they benefited from. This time it's not one industry, it's not one sector in a broader economy, it's like pretty much every white collar industry that exists, but also it's happening simultaneously and on a global scale.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bit where I'm like, okay.
So an example I think is interesting is people always bring up something like an influencer. They're saying like, this was like content creator, influencer, these were jobs that didn't exist, like 10 years ago. And you're like, yeah, but even like something like an influencer is like, all right, well, I'm going to like influence people on what to buy. It assumes a certain amount of consumerism, a certain amount of like difficulty and scarcity in the goods. And you kind of be like, all right, well, if you had just super, a lot of intelligence everywhere that's basically free, a lot of robotics everywhere that becomes basically free because we spend, maybe we spend 10 years just making the robotics free because we don't have anything else to do. But then at that point you're like, all right, well, now everything's basically free and you can have whatever you want, and the way you would get whatever you want isn't by somebody influencing you necessarily. It would just be that you go, oh, I need this. I was saying maybe like the last job is experiencer. And it's like, I'm just going to experience stuff and then voice my concerns about what isn't perfect. That's like weirdly dystopian.
Yeah.
But it's, I think it probably gets to this point where it's just like, the stoic in me would say like, just don't, like you can't control any of this stuff in the future. Like the stuff that is on this, like, I don't know, 2 to 5 year time horizon is influenceable and knowable to a certain extent. You can see what's going to get replaced first. You can see how it's going to get replaced. So don't do those jobs, and then start the businesses that work in that manner from day one. But
this comes back, this like full circle to some degree, because the challenge is now that most people have this like reinforced bias to believe that the job that they have is somehow special and that the skill that they have is somehow unique.
That's just my skills, though, not other people's skills. No, I'm always trying to get myself out of a job. So
yeah, well, that's it, right? It's like, what's
maybe
the most
the last
efficient way to
job
do
is
this?
the person trying to avoid the work. It's just like you got just be all the people that never wanted to work will be the last people working because they put them in jobs and then they get themselves out of the work.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I wonder what you expect like a government response to this as well, and there's so many theories that float around. Mostly all roads lead to UBI, but I feel like there's a bunch of different things that
the correct way to think about that is all roads lead to massive amounts of inflation.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say,
destroy all sorts. You need to.
Yeah.
If you're going to worry about it, worry about that. Like, I've never met a government that didn't increase the money supply.
Exactly.
So.
Well, I mean, the first like cab off the rank will be, let's try and regulate the hell out of this stuff and try and preserve the kind of the status quo as best they can. And I think that leads to a bunch of like, JobKeeper type programs that we've seen in the past, and that's obviously where the money printing kicks in. That's even pre-UBI. That's
centralization into government jobs as well.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, like if you're in government or one of the two parties that are allowed to govern, and you buy into the notion that like, okay, well, we pay the bills of everybody, and the only jobs that remain are the ones that we pay. Well, you have like a very loyal workforce at this point in time. Like, who's going to vote against destroying their own job? Like, that's just not,
exactly
not how it works.
Well, I mean, I think there's almost maybe like a bigger mathematical problem for governments here as well. It's like if all of a sudden you automate like huge chunks of knowledge work, well, you've just like had this massive erosion of the tax base as well. I know in Australia a couple of years ago, I think like the percentage of federal tax receipts from individual income tax was like nearly 50% thereabouts. I mean, that's significant. So what do you do in that circumstance? You're going to print more money, aren't you? Because you're not going to cut spending. So this is the thing, because austerity is just so unpopular.
Yep.
No one ever votes for austerity. So they're just going to have to like vastly increase the amount of money printing that exists in order to keep paying for these programs that exist, probably expand these programs because now more people are out of work. And this is just like a massive spiral.
I think so. Government's going to government.
Yep. And probably not what I thought we'd cover, but I mean, so I think like one of the things that we've talked about in the past that kind of ties into all of this is this notion of the bionic human. And I think this is like the kind of the bionic human versus the human at the edge, which is kind of our framework for assessing whether or not you just give people a bunch of tools inside the business and then that provides some productivity improvement, versus essentially going back to first principles and rebuilding process on a kind of AI standard. I kind of feel like that's where the market's at the moment. They're probably more in the bionic human space at the moment, where they're like, we'll just give people all of the tools and we'll get the upside to this. I think, when I think about this through the lens of the value trap, which we did a whole episode on as well, we can go back and listen to that. But when I think about this through the lens of the value trap, I actually think the bionic human plays out exactly the same way, but it's worse for the business because they never actually dropped their cost base in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
And so, like, when we talk about the mean reversion phase in the value trap, which is basically you've gone and you've created all of this, these excess returns, and you've simultaneously collapsed your OPEX in the business. So you've had this big margin, but all of the competition emerges to compete that away. You get this mean reversion later in the cycle. I think the issue with a bionic human approach is you essentially just have like a way higher cost line, which doesn't fall, but the revenue falls way lower. And so now your business is just losing shit tons of money and goes under.
Yeah, like it only works if nobody else figures out the human at the edge model. Like I think they're somewhat sequential. Like they don't have to be sequential.
Yeah.
I think the way most people would do it in an existing business is sequential, that you would say, I don't have time to redesign all of my processes from scratch. The first thing I'm going to do is use these tools to give myself some headspace. And I actually think that's quite reasonable.
That's good.
I used to be a bit like, no, just do this, just do the right thing.
Yep.
And you're like, you know what? Like, it's not really where the world is at the moment. And people do just need tools to get their head, like get some space. Like you need headspace to do these things, even just to consider it and get comfortable with the risk of like, shit, I need to redesign everything. I've been running this thing for 10 years. You don't just do it over drinks in the evening. You've got to spend some time on it. So you've got to find a way to get that space, and you're not going to have it in most, even in like larger businesses. It's rare that you're the person that gets to spend all the time doing it. And if you are the person that gets to have all of that time to think about stuff, you're probably not the person that's on the tools enough to understand what's going on. So it is difficult. You kind of need to free up a bit of everybody's time to go through this process and then engage in it. So I think you'll always see the bionic human first. I think if you're creating a new organization, I just wouldn't bother. I'd skip it and just go straight to the end game. Like every time you're looking to do something, think about, all right, well, what's the process to produce the thing that I'm producing, and how can I just take people out of the loop?
Yeah, I think that's the big risk to the incumbents is like, while they're all trying to figure this stuff out, you've got a new breed of business that's being spun up in their industry that's just going to come and eat their lunch.
But then they have the opposing problem that they just have no market share and they have no distribution. So it'll be a race in a way. Like, I think the thing that you'd want to be aware of is like, all right, well, there is a race. So I am going to have to race, and I am going to have to race against people that started with no people involved and built the thing from scratch and then grew. And there's a question of like, well, what's easier, growing or eliminating your own cost base?
Yeah.
And that will likely be different in different industries and different areas as well. Like, some people aren't loyal. Like, if you're buying a service like once a year or once every couple of years when something goes wrong, like, I don't know, my air conditioner breaks, who do I call? I might call the same person I did before, but it's pretty much like a new thing every time it happens.
Yeah. I mean, I also think there's like a unevenness that exists in the bionic human, the way that plays out as well, because people use tools in different ways.
Yep.
You know, there's that classic meme where it's like, you know, you've got the guy sending, you know, the email is like, you know, turn these 4 bullet points into like, you
Big
know,
long
12-page
email.
report. And then the person on the other end of it's like, oh God, I don't have time to read this. Turn this 12-page report into like 4 bullet points, you know, and it's like this circularity that exists there, which is just everyone wasting everyone's time.
Yep.
I think that plays out to some degree with the tools as well. So it's like the beneficiaries of the tools are not necessarily all going to be the same.
Yep.
But I think it's still like an essential part of the learning journey for pretty much everybody, right? So you just see what's possible, and then that opens your mind.
Yeah, that's the other aspect that you just can't say enough almost, right? Is that like you need to, it's hard to go from like zero to understanding like where all the impacts are. You know, obviously, you know, get us in to do a workshop and we'll tell you.
Yeah.
I can tell you about it, but telling is one thing and showing is a better thing. So you're better off like try and understand it, then get on the tools and start doing it, and then start applying it to problems that you have.
Yeah.
Or like, what's something that's a bit annoying that I'd love to solve, but I've never had the capability, capacity, intent to solve before. Do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Just get rid of it. Remove it from your life completely, like with software and automation. Like that's a cool thing.
Yeah, and there's also like tool choice as well. You know, there's a commitment that needs to be made around like, do I choose Cursor or Windsurf? Are they practically the same? How do I know if they're the same? You know, which do I just prefer subjectively? There's like a whole bunch of learning that, yeah, or you know, there's a bunch, right? And that's like, there is a kind of subjective learning process that you just need to go through.
And like I'm doing it at the moment with a lot of the coding work I'm doing is like, again, it's almost like going back to the work I did with Stackwork to say like the process is correct. Like the painful thing about the work with Stackwork was when you run in this sort of hive model and you've got so many tasks with so many different developers like in your head at any one time, and I was just talking about it is like the OODA loop is too long, right? Like it's like these are like open tabs in my head that stay open for somewhere between 3 hours and 3 days, and it's just like mentally uncomfortable. And that's hard, and like there's going to be ways to make that easier, but I think one of the better ways that I've done is that to take the same process and to use it to how I interact with AI agents, and it slows down the interaction from a point of view of like just build this, plan, act, done. Like that's very quick, but very quickly that goes off the reservation. I've got no idea what code has been done at any particular point in time. It might have been that the first thing you did broke everything, and then you built 10 things on top of that and I didn't know. So actually getting it to step through and do like one thing at a time, it's like do a thing, test it, 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 in a way that I'm aware as the observer and controller of the process. I'm constantly aware and constantly seeing it being built. I still have the massive momentum, but I'm aware of exactly where we are in the process.
Yes.
Like it's a huge difference to like how easy it is to work with these coding tools.
Yeah, I think we just started talking about this before we fired up the pod. Like maybe we should dive into this in a bit more detail in like terms of how you're using that tool, like practically. You know, like one of the things that I was saying was like, okay, because I'm like, I started vibe coding, but I actually think this is more of a learning journey for me. Like I'm actually less concerned about the output. At the end of the day, I'm more concerned about, am I figuring out how to get there?
Yeah, you build so you can learn how to build.
Pretty much. But
It's
also,
not like I don't just want the thing. I want to know
Yeah.
how to build things.
But equally, I think I said this to you, it's like, but if it works,
Yeah.
how much does it matter? You know, like, if I'm building something that I'm trying to distribute, okay, then there's a whole bunch of, you know, risks that are baked into this code that I probably should be across that I'm not across. Okay, fair enough. But if I'm using this for myself and it's just locally on my MacBook, I'm kind of like less concerned about that if it works. And so, like, the thing that's been really powerful for me, obviously, like, I use Cursor, and so I've got the agent running in Cursor and write a lot of the code. And I'm not just sitting there like accepting everything that comes through. Like, I can see what that's doing. I can see the output, and I'm like, okay, this isn't really what I asked for. I might reject this and just go back a step and just figure out like why it tried to do that thing.
Yeah.
But I'll also have Claude running on my monitor separately, and Claude is like my project manager or my technical co-founder on this. And we've basically started there. We've mapped out what the project should be. We've like ideated, and we've come up with like essentially a roadmap or a PRD.
Yeah.
And then I will use Claude to essentially turn that roadmap into like a sequential series of prompts that I can feed back into Cursor.
Yeah.
So that I can manage this like, you know, risk of trying to one-shot everything, which it sometimes will try to do. If you just give it like an open mandate, it will go, I'm going to build.
And when it starts
everything.
going, like it moves at such a speed that you can't even see.
You can't follow it.
Like you can watch it and go, well, that looks about right, but like you're not reading anything. Like, it's moved to a new file, it's made the new thing, it's done that, it's changed over here.
Exactly.
Oh, there we go. I just made this quick change here, which has introduced a bug. But like, it's just. It's
But you
an
can lose
interesting
track,
challenge.
right?
But
It's so easy to lose track if this thing just goes off and like essentially just takes, you know, goes carte blanche. I'm just going to build whatever the hell I want, and you have no idea because it's moved on so quickly. I think like that sequential approach. I mean, I adopted that for my own benefit because I want to be able to, you know, learn what's happening through this process. And I sat and planned it out a lot before I even jumped into Cursor. Which is the other thing. It's like tempting to just go and open up Cursor and go, okay, build me this.
I do it every now and again, and I almost invariably then have to throw away whatever it was that I did. It's like, I can't use this in any meaningful way. I'd rather, like, okay, it's figured out how to do that. Like, then maybe I get it to write like a documentation of like how it did it, and then you take that and move it forward. So certainly, like, vibe prototyping is a great thing to do.
Well, there's a speed advantage there. But the other thing is Cursor, like when it's done the steps that you've asked for in the prompt, it will then give you the summary of all the stuff it's done. And so I will then copy that summary and give it back to Claude and go, look, this is what Cursor's done. So it's keeping track with me. And I'll be like, okay, just talk to me about these steps. So it's much slower, but I feel like I've got a way better understanding of what's actually going on. And then we tend to get, you know, an output that just works.
So I think that's it. Is like there's a tendency here to just give in to the tool and let it do its thing, which is fine in certain environments. I think in others, like you don't necessarily want to do that. We haven't extracted the human yet. There's still a human in the loop here.
Yeah,
they're not at the edge at the moment. We could run human at the edge, and it's probably good enough for like prototyping, like ideation, generation, stuff like this.
Yeah.
We could do, like, for actually building something that you want, that you're going to have to deal with after the fact or put your name to. You can't quite extract the human yet, and therefore you now need to think of, well, all these tools are almost built as though they run without the human. And I need to figure out, how do I slow them down enough that I'm now in the OODA loop. Because the problem with just general agent stuff is the OODA loops are too fast. And so I just abrogate responsibility and go, yeah, you do your thing. Like, I just can't keep up. Whereas if I can purposely slow it down to a level where I'm like, look, here's your plan, a great plan, right? Give me 10 stages, each with like a human testable thing as the output of each stage, right? Okay, here it is. Okay, do only step 1, and it does step 1 to 3, but it's close enough, right? You know, it's like, and then you can actually test that what's been implemented, and now you understand how it's building towards the end point. And the difference might be that it's, in all honesty, I think it's probably quicker, because the amount of time and cost of just credits to fix the crap that it just did, because you have to like because at that point you're now maintaining the context window for all that crap. So you have this like exponentially increasing cost of calls as you move forwards with these models, and it'll be like, oh yeah, that's a cent, that's a cent, that's a cent, that's 2 cents, that's 10 cents, that's $1, and you're like, fuck, that grew quick.
Yes.
But it's like, oh, but if I don't, then I'm gonna just aggregate. Oh, what's $1? That's fine, like it's fine. And then, but it moves you from this situation where you might have been spending like, I don't know, like 40 cents to build a new feature is now $2. Which is good. Like, that's still cheap for a software developer.
Yeah, of course.
But you're like, you know what? It'd be good if I could just. I'd be also happy to just do it in 50 cents and actually understand what the fuck happened.
Exactly.
So I can then build the next thing, and I don't want to have to keep throwing away all this code.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
definitely a lot of stuff that I've just let it generate and thrown away. I mean, sometimes you could have a project which is just doing that in the background. And then you have the one that you're building on, and it just gives you something to go and look at and check in on that you don't really care about. But it is giving you a proof of concept about something that you know you need to build, and you just want to experiment with how you would build it. And then you throw that away, and you take the bits that you learn and you bring them into the main project. So
I think what's been really handy for me is being able to compartmentalize the kind of the let's say the feature or some aspect of the code that I want to focus on, and then I can keep iterating on that, because if you don't define those up front and it just goes off and builds like 10 features, none of them are kind of necessarily perfect or do exactly what you want. So you need to then go back sequentially anyway. So you may as well, if you've got the roadmap ahead of time with something like a language model guiding you, then all of a sudden it's like, I know what's coming up, but let me just focus on dialing in this one feature and making sure that it's functional, it works, it looks the way I want it to look. All of those questions that inevitably arise, but you haven't got this like bloated code base before you try to go back and make all those changes, and that impacts the call cost as well, right? Because now you've just got like one feature that you're building, and you're trying to perfect that before you move on to feature number 2, and then feature number 3, and then feature number 4.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just build all 4 features, and all of a sudden it's got this much larger code base to have to go and sift through to figure out how to improve that very first feature.
Yeah.
And so I find I'm having to restart projects like way less than like even a month ago. Because often, it's the same thing. It's just curiosity. It's like, how hard is this thing to build? Let me just try and clone it.
What you're doing is you're speedrunning, like rediscovering software development methodologies. Like, turns out if you write a plan, it's better.
It's good having a plan.
What the fuck? Why didn't nobody say this? Like, I thought it was all agile, and it's like, like planning and thinking about the order is a big thing.
It makes sense.
I mean, I think I sometimes used to describe the Stackwork version of like, it's like really fast waterfall. Like, you want to do the waterfall components of like really thinking about it, designing it, planning it, ordering what you're going to do, and then do one thing at a time until it's done. It's just, instead of that taking you a 6-month iteration, now it takes like 2 minutes. Whereas like the agile component was like, we'll work at like a very quick human speed. But then as soon as you try and work like that with something that's not working at a human speed, and it's working at like 1,000 times human speed, fuck me, that's just, it just like, it takes it out of your, I don't know, like mental perception or something. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, you need a different approach. And I think like just very fast waterfall is probably the bionic human version of that. And then at some point we figure out how to meaningfully do the planning and architecture piece. And then I think it just, software becomes basically free at that point.
I think the other thing that really helps is when you're building for yourself, like you innately understand the problem that you've got. You're never trying to guess at like, will my market use this does it need to be a certain way for a particular market that I'm trying to build for? It's like, it's immaterial. I'm trying to build this for myself. I've got a problem. This is how I would use this tool. And I just find that so much easier to work through, because I don't need to second guess any of the things that I'm doing. I can just see the output and go, no, I would prefer this looked a bit different. I'd prefer like a set of steps that help me walk me through
the
this.
whole thing again.
You
can be that like really just intolerant like product lead.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
come in and go, no, it's all wrong.
This is shit.
Do it again. Start from scratch. Something going to cost $2. Fuck it.
Do you know, it's funny, sometimes like when I'm doing a roadmap with Claude, it will put time frames next to it and it will be like, oh, this part should take 12 weeks. And I'm just like, lol.
Yeah,
Watch me come back to you in 10 minutes.
Yeah, it is insane, like how much, like the speed of iteration here is just really ramped up. But, all right. I think we're coming up on an hour now. We need a title.
Oh, God.
Like we've got, I think maybe Rise of the Generalist.
Yeah, that's actually quite nice. We
All
did
right.
spend a lot of time on that.
Done.
Done.
Is there a famous general? Is there like a pun that we could have? Is there a general robot thing? No.
I don't know.
I don't know. All right, something like that. Rise of the Generalist.
I think that works. It's descriptive.
Yep,
We did spend a lot of time on generalists.
perfect. Rise of the Generalist.
This is cool. At some point, we should probably like talk about some of the tools that we're building as well. And
Yes,
go
yeah,
into a
I
little
wondered
bit
if
more
we
detail.
might get into that a bit more today, but it's, what are we at? 1 hour 10. I reckon we do that
next week.
next week.
Yeah,
Business on
go
air.
into it.
Let's do it next week.
Cool.
All right. Oh, we do have like potentially some guests as well
Oh, we do.
to,
Yeah.
to bring in. So let's see how we can schedule those. So next week, maybe we get a guest, maybe we go into tooling. But let's go there.
We'll see. We'll see.
All
how it
right.
goes. Awesome.
That's the good stuff.